we have to work from the bottom up to try to change that system. But the system, again, you don't change the system by changing the people who react to the incentives. You change the incentives, and that's the political system that's broken.
I make just a comment on that point, because in principle it sounds good to stop crony capitalism. Let me give you another angle in terms of political intervention in the marketplace, and I don't know that you agree or not. Markets commodify things. That's what they do. So if you want to look at the 17 fund Superfund sites in Montana, it's a result of the commodification of one part of nature at the expense of the other. It's externalizing. The economists call it externalities. So the taxpayers pick up the destructive side, and the guys that own the company got the creative side. And a lot of miners got wages and beat up and died in the mines and all this very recently, as a matter of fact, in Virginia. So you have that problem. How do you get government out of that? Are you suggesting getting government out of that business? Environmental conservation through regulations, mine safety, those sorts of things that arise as a consequence of the commodification of the customer and everything else. And I'll give you another specific example that really bothers me that I wrote about in the book. We allow in the United States of America the public's airwaves, we own them, we forgot that, to be utilized by corporations to propagandize little children to buy junk cereal that will add to the obesity crisis in America, which is a national financial security threat. Now, should government allow that, or should government say, no, you're not going to advertise to children? What would you say to that, Carl?
On the public airways, if you want to rate, there are so many options out there beyond the public airways right now that I would say we could have a market solution to that. If you wanted to regulate them, I don't think you should, but I'm not going to go to the mat over that. On the mines, those people didn't die in that mine because of a lack of regulation. They died because there were rules on the books against everything that happened there.
Misdemeanors.
They died because of lack of enforcement. And there's a guy going to jail right now because of that. So I am fully in favor of capturing the externalities, of putting the full price of a product, the full cost of a product into the price, whether that cost is pollution, whether it's degradation of the landscape, that should absolutely be placed into the price of the product. We do that with things like the severance taxes and things like that. I have no problem with that whatsoever. What I don't like to see is when people take their, well, first of all, what I don't like to see is when people take their preferences as opposed to true externalities and put those into the price of the product as a way to either punish or reward certain behaviors.
Bill.
I'd like to bring both of you back to your central thing that you started with tonight and pose a proposition or a question to you. And I confess I don't know the answer to this, so I'm looking for your answer. Is it really fair to seek the guidance or the wisdom of the Founding Fathers, if you will, or to ask them to answer questions about subjects or issues that I think, quite frankly, they did not have any sense about? And I use two examples. Take the concept of the modern corporation. That did not exist, I think, fairly stated, in 1787 to 1789. In fact, the concept of the corporation then was very different. It was a charter that came from government. There was actually a great deal of suspicion about granting that exercise and limiting it. And the Founding Fathers had no experience with the rise of the modern corporation at the end of the 19th century and well into the 20th. Another part, they had no experience with the development of industrial capitalism as we know it. They had a market system. And there was a mercantilist type economy. There was international trade. There was commerce of a sort. Not of the kind that developed in the latter part of the 19th century with large agglomerations of capital, for better or for worse. And while I think the Founding Fathers teach us a lot, all of us here in this room benefit by competing ideas that they had back at the end of the 18th century. But is what they have to say then really enough to answer and address a lot of the kinds of questions we have today, whether it's the two I posed to you or others?
Who wants to go first?
Carl?
I think what they tried to do was create a system or a set of institutions that could react to the type of changes that you mentioned. And I think they did. I really do. And I think to the extent that we can go back and look at what their values were and what their intentions were, I think we can go reach back and see what they would think. Unfortunately, we've gotten away from that institutional system. We tend to legislate things rather than go back and say, should the Constitution adapt to this and use that process? You can't change the Constitution now practically because it's so easy to legislate your priorities into it. I think if that system had worked better throughout time and we hadn't taken the easy way out, we would still have a much more adaptable document. We would have a much changed Constitution, I think, than we have now. But it would still be a basis of law that we could all look to for some type of stability as instead of waiting for the next legislature to meet and writing checks trying to get our way. So I think for the basic values, we can go back to them. I think for the institutions, if we could go back to that, and that's going to be a tough one, but if we could go back to that, we could have a system that allows those different priorities to be played out and come up with an outcome that balances those rights more responsibly than we have now, as opposed to basically just a political class and now a political corporate class that does the balancing for us, and not in many ways outside of our reach to influence.
I think your point is very well taken. I think at the same time that I think of the best of the founders' principles are in part the best because they're principled and flexible over time. So I think if you take the idea of forming a more perfect union, of ensuring domestic tranquility, promoting the general welfare, and securing the blessings of liberty, those are concepts that are flexible. In other words, they're principles that can be applied in different circumstances. I think the other advantage with them, and frankly that's the reason I wrote the book around them, was because I think Americans have a gut level loyalty to these principles. Even if most of us haven't read them, studied them, it means something to us. It's sort of the center of who we like to define ourselves are. And I think therefore it's a practical, constructive basis to begin a serious discussion on many, many issues. It doesn't give the answer to everything, but it frames some important concepts. That's my view. It does for me.
We are officially out of time. I think that some of us may be around for a few more minutes if there are other questions you want to ask one-on-one. But we are due to end at 8:45, and end at 8:45 we shall, formally anyway. I want to thank Brian and Carl. I think it's been a very interesting, fascinating discussion, and I've enjoyed working with both of them toward giving you something that I hope you can take things away from. So thank you all very, very much for coming.